Morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. It's a beautiful morning outside actually. On the way here, I was driving and then I said, oh, what a beautiful morning. Then, of course, many of us, on such a beautiful morning, there are so many things we can do. We can go to the beach, we can go to the swimming pool or go to the club, we can go to play golf, and we can also meet up with friends. But I'm very happy to see so many faces and a lot of people walking in also. This is wonderful. Thank you very much for coming and for spending the time with us, for sacrificing this beautiful Sunday to come and share the Dhamma. So for the next 90 minutes, hopefully we will all share the Dhamma and enjoy in the merits and the happiness of this Dhamma sharing. The topic today is from concept to conflict. Right? Basically, this is talking about how the mind actually perceives whatever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, and we begin to recognize and interpret whatever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. And then at the same time we begin to make up stories, or we call it conceptualize, making up stories about everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. So all this is going on in the mind. And then, of course, when we begin to make stories, we begin to form views. We have certain views. And then we cling on to these views and say, this is my thought, this is my view. And because of this kind of clinging to our views, very often it leads to debates. And debates often leads to conflict. So this is how the mind conceptualizes. And then we end up conflicting and debating and conflicting and having arguments. So today's sharing, we're going to explore the Buddha's teaching in this area, but we're going to use a little bit of science to explain, right, the scientific aspect of it. So we're going to see how the mind recognizes, interprets and proliferates. Proliferates means it begins to create ideas and run away, and imagination and things like that. The mind begins to proliferate and conceptualizes. Conceptualizes means it begins to make up stories, our own stories, our personal stories. And this can lead to views, forming of views. And then we begin to cling on to these views. We personalize it, right? So the process of interpretation is called papancha in Pali. And the process of clinging to ideas or clinging to anything is called upadana. Right? So basically this is the clinging to concepts and views. And because of this clinging, it leads to debates. People begin to argue with each other, and arguments lead to conflict. And conflict often also then leads to wars, even in the case of country to country. Right? So we're going to explore what the Buddha taught us. And the Buddha basically taught in one of the sutras called the Majjhima Nikaya number 18, called the Madhupindika Sutra, or the short form for it, or the nickname for it is called the Honeyball Sutra. In this sutra, the Buddha pointed out there are 7 unconscious mental arising. That means there are 7 ways our mind begin to arise and create these stories. Right? And this mental arising creates what is known as underlying tendencies. That means when they arise, they make us want to do things in a particular way, putting pressure on us to behave in a certain way. That is why it's called the underlying tendencies. So there are these 7 things that we're going to take a look at, and we have to realize that these are shortcomings in us. Right? That means these are basically things that we have to be aware of. They create our faults in life, and because of that, we begin to argue and debate and all that. So take a quick look. Then we'll take a quick look at how we can manifest a more peaceful and harmonious life. That means we can try to overcome this. So let's go back to the actual sutra, Majjhima Nikaya 18. I'm going to give you a storytelling version. I'm not going to read the sutra. It can be very boring. So basically this sutra is about this person, Dandapani. And Dandapani met the Buddha, and then they had a brief exchange of words. So It all happened when the Buddha visited his hometown, or when he was Prince Siddhartha. That was his hometown, Kapilavastu. Okay, so this Kapilavastu is his hometown, and he visited that a few times. So during one of the occasions that the Buddha visited that, after he had his morning alms round and taken his food, the Buddha was resting under a tree in a park called the Great Wood Park, and this is the Nigoda's Park in an area called the Great Wood. So the Buddha was resting under that tree, and then this person Dandapani came along. Dandapani is a Sakyan. He's an elderly Sakyan. That means he is belonging to the same clan that Prince Siddhartha belonged to, and he was an elder. So people respected him as an elder person. So basically, Dandapani came along and saw the Buddha. Of course, being an elder in the clan, in the back of his mind, he still considered the Buddha as junior to him, because the Buddha as a Prince Siddhartha was of course junior to this elderly Dandapani. The word Dandapani actually means man with a walking stick. Right? In those days, people are called by a nickname according to the way they are, or the way they behave, or their conditions. So this is a man who goes around with a walking stick as an elderly. So Dandapani. So Dandapani was a proud man, because he knew he was the village elders and people all respected him. So he expected the same kind of respect even from the Buddha. Of course, at that time he was not aware what is a Buddha really. He was just quite ignorant about those things. So he was a proud man, right, conceited, and he approached the Buddha, and then in a very proud way he just asked the Buddha, "What do you teach?" Right? So in his tone of sarcasm, he basically asked the Buddha, "What do you teach?" So of course the Buddha was very courteous, and the Buddha just simply responded in a very simple way and said, "My teaching is not to come into conflict with anyone in the world," because the Buddha already sensed the way this person is asking. He was looking for a debate. And of course, now by the way, I'm using translations from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji. So if you read the sutra, you might see the words being a bit different, but basically the meaning is the same. So the Buddha realized that this man is a very proud man. He was just looking for conflict, so looking for a debate. So Buddha stated very simply, "My teaching is not to come into conflict with anyone in the world. I do not have any attachment to sensual pleasures, nor do I argue with anyone." So it was his way of advising Dandapani, right? That there is no attachment to sensual pleasures and don't start any argument. And I have no concern for existence nor non-existence. And this one I'll explain later on, right? It's part of the conditions that the Buddha explained later. But basically he says that he is not concerned about existence nor non-existence, because normally that is how arahants have trained their mind to basically reflect on the realities of the world, neither existence nor non-existence. So, and then the Buddha went on to say, "I have no emotional reaction to sensations, and I am not concerned with what is perceived." So this word is tanha. Tanha is often translated as craving. My teacher pointed out that tanha is actually an emotional reaction, and it's very correct. Emotional reaction is a very precise and accurate way to explain the meaning of tanha. Because tanha is referring to the condition that when you experience something pleasurable, you want more of it. You react to it. When you experience something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. You want to push it away and you want to fight against it. So all these are emotional reaction. And then the Buddha went on to say, in whatever way a person recognizes something by classifying or labeling it, it is in this way that past experiences begin to affect future behavior unconsciously. Which means, what the Buddha was saying, that whenever we see, hear, smell, taste or touch something, our memory begin to arise. And the memory will recall things from the past and create the mind to begin to cause us to react in a certain way, to behave in a certain way. And all this is happening unconsciously if we don't train our mind to be mindful. This is why the Buddha has always taught us to train our mind to become mindful to whatever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. So if we don't, memory arises and disturbs the mind and creates certain thoughts, and then we begin to behave in a certain way. And all this is happening unconsciously. We are not aware of it unless we train our mind to become mindful. Mindfulness training, or what the Buddha calls satipatthana. So what does mindfulness training do? The mindfulness training helps us to cultivate our mind. Cultivate our mind, for one thing, to bring our mind to a level of peace and calm, and at the same time to purify our mind. So in order to understand this further, we have to understand what the Buddha taught. What is the mind? And of course, until not many years ago, scientists were arguing, in fact they are still arguing, what is the mind? That the Buddha has always taught the mind is an activity. The mind is not an existence. It doesn't exist. Your mind does not exist. What you think exists are your brains, but it is the activity of the brain that brings about this experience of the mind. So the mind is an experience. The only way you can experience this activity of the brain is to recognize that it is an experience, it is not an existence. So the activity of the brain gives rise to this mental experience. So the Buddha pointed out that there are three kinds of mental experiences that make up the mind. The first one he calls vijnana, and that is because of what we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, giving rise to this process called the panchakanda, and then we begin to perceive what we have seen, heard, tasted, touched and smelled through our sense organs. So this is called vijnana, a perception arising in the mind that, oh, I have seen something, I have heard something, I have smelled something, I have tasted something, I have touched something. So this is vijnana, this perception arising in the mind. The next thing in the mind is that the mind is trying to interpret what has been seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch. So the Buddha calls this process mano. And of course the psychologists call this cognitive process. This is the process that leads to creating concepts, interpreting what we have seen, giving meaning to what we have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch. And this meaning given to it actually is our views, our thoughts. So this process of giving meaning is called conceptualizing. At the same time, mano is a conscious part of the mental activity, the part where we actually can make decision what to do. So the making of decision what to do, consciously, that is called intellect. So that's why mano is responsible for conception and intellect. Conceiving by interpreting what we have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch, and intellect by actually making a decision what to do next. At the same time, everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch comes with a certain feeling, a certain sensation, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And it is because of this pleasant or unpleasant sensation from what we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, another part of the mind arises called the chitta. Chitta is what psychologists call the affective process, or in short, a simple word is emotion. Every time we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, there is a feeling associated with that sensation, and that feeling causes us to react. If it is something pleasant, we want more of it. If it is something unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. And if it is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, we want to allow it to continue, without reacting to it. So at the same time, every time we see, hear, smell, taste or touch anything, we begin to personalize that and say, oh, I see something. If you see your friend walking towards you, and if your thought that arises, what kind of thought arises? Your thought will say, I see my friend coming here. I see him. Oh, the I arises. We don't say things like, these eyes see him. Right? We say, I see him, that I arises. So we personalize every experience because of that. And it is this personalization of experience that leads us to create the notion that there is a self being affected by this experience. You see, when we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch anything through our senses, there is only the Panchakanda arising. But we cling on to this experience and say, I see something. So the I arises. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this I arises later on. So basically, this is how the mind works. The three parts of mental activity, right? Experience, mental experience. So if we take a look at the flow chart and see how it works, things happening around the environment, they stimulate our sense organs. We have 5 sense organs that are interacting with the environment or receiving stimulations from the environment. Our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. Right? And when that happens, the Panchakanda arises, and this Panchakanda leads us to form a perception. That means, oh, I have seen something. Or the thought arises that the mind has seen something. And that gives us the experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. At the same time, the mind also wants to interpret what was seen. So now you have seen something. Let's say you saw a dog sitting there. Then there is this mental image in the mind. Oh, there is a dog. And then you try to interpret, oh, there is a dog. So this interpreting there is a dog is done by the mano, by referring to memory of past experience. Every time you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch something, the mind automatically goes back to memory to bring back from memory past experiences and try to interpret what was seen, heard, smelled, taste, and touch. Even if it is something you've never seen before, you can recognize it if it falls into category, because the mind likes to categorize, group things together. Take, for example, this bottle of mineral water. This bottle of mineral water it's a specific bottle that you've never seen before. But because of the brand, because of the shape, because it is belonging to the category of mineral water, it's easy for you to recognize that this is a bottle of mineral water. The same with this mouse. When you see this computer mouse, you recognize it as a computer mouse because it looks like all the computer mouses you have ever seen in the past. So that's how the mind works. We categorize what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It goes into memory. Whenever we see something similar, memory arises and we interpret, this is what I have seen. So the first thing in the mind is to answer this question, what is this that I have seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched? And that's how that works. This process of interpreting what has been seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched in the words in red, that is papancha. Papancha is recognition, recognizing, right? Recognizing what was perceived by the sense organs. At the same time, we give meaning to what was seen. Giving meaning is called conceptualizing, creating a concept. And this is the recognition, creating the concept. That's how the mind works. So when we see something that looks like a dog we have ever seen, even if it is a dog we have never seen before, we know it's a dog because dogs all look alike in the same category. So therefore we begin to create this concept in the mind that, oh, I have seen a dog out there. So this concept of an entity that is identified as a dog. So what you have seen arises as a mental image, and that is called rupa. And then you begin to interpret, what is this I have seen? Ah, it's a dog. Giving it the meaning, giving it the name, the label, a dog. That process is called nama. It is the mind giving the label, this is a dog. So that's why you have nama rupa. So basically, rupa is the mental image that you have seen something. Nama is the label you give to the meaning of what you have seen. Now some of you will realize Bahasa Malaysia is derived partly from Sanskrit. So the Bahasa Malaysia word nama rupa is the same meaning as the Pali word nama rupa. And a lot of people translate rupa as object, but actually rupa is not object. Rupa is the image of an object. Bahasa Malaysia, what's the meaning of rupa? Rupa does not refer to an object. Rupa in Bahasa Malaysia means appearance. Appearance is a mental image that appears in the mind, right? So that's why rupa is really a mental image that arises. Nama is not mentality. Some people translate nama as mentality. Nama is the process of identifying something and giving it a label. Nama, that is what Malay word means, a name, a label. So that is really how it works. Recognition and conceptualizing, giving it a meaning. Right? So up to this point, we have recognized something. And the Buddha pointed out that when you begin to recognize something, the mind begins to work unconsciously to try to do something. Okay? So he pointed out that in whatever way a person recognizes something by classifying or labeling it, it is in this way that past experiences begin to affect behavior, future behavior. Okay? So the Buddha went on to explain this process called anusayanam. So I'm going to explain what is anusayanam. There are 7 different ways we try to interpret something. So it is in this way these unconscious mental processes arise and influence behavior, leading to disagreements and conflicts. So in other words, every time we see, hear, smell, taste and touch something, we recognize there are 7 ways that the mind begins to create stories, and these stories make us cling on to the views, and then we begin to argue with people and say, I believe this is like that, I think this and I think that. All the I and the views come in. So there are 7 ways. What are the 7? And these 7 ways are called anusayanam. The first one is called raganusayanam. Raga is related to the experience of sensual pleasures. So basically it's desires and greed arising unconsciously when we react to something pleasurable. That's why it's called raganusayanam. Raga is associated with reaction to sensual pleasures, desire for sensual pleasures. The opposite of that, displeasures and pain, is called patiganusayanam. Patika is associated with aversion and hatred towards something painful, right? So basically it's anger and hatred arising unconsciously towards something that is unpleasant or uncomfortable. Then the third way is forming of views. This is called dittanusayanam, and basically from the word ditta, ditti, right? This is forming of views. So therefore we begin to have opinions and beliefs and views arising unconsciously about what we have seen, heard, smell, taste and touch. The fourth one is vichikichanusayanam, and from that word vichikicha, many of you would have heard the translation of the word vichikicha to mean skeptical doubt, but actually vichikicha is not really skeptical doubt. It leads to doubt, but the actual condition of vichikicha is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance arising unconsciously. So what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance, if you break it down to the word cognitive, cognitive means the way we think. Now the way we think can be in 2 different ways. Can be rational, can be emotional, because we have 2 kinds of minds going on, mano and chitta. Mano will think rationally, chitta will think emotionally. So we have rational thinking pulling in one direction, emotional thinking pulling in the opposite direction. And when these 2 are pulling in opposite direction, this is what the scientists call cognitive dissonance. The thinking is now being pulled in opposite direction. How does that happen? Take for example, we have these 5 precepts that we take. What is the first precept? Panatipata. That is not to harm or hurt or kill living beings. Now, that's what we like to believe in. That's what we want to practice. The belief and the wanting to practice the first precept, that is rational thinking. Yeah? We know this is good. We know this is wholesome. We want to do this. We do not want to harm living beings. But at the same time, we have emotions. At night when you go to sleep, assuming you didn't turn your aircon too cold, and this is always happening when the aircon is not cold enough, mosquito comes along, comes to your ear, and then you brush it away because you are a good Buddhist, you don't want to kill the mosquito. Then again, it comes back. It comes back again and again and again. After 10 times, the mosquito keeps coming to your ear. Do you think you're going to continue to allow it to come? Then you start to think, maybe I should do that. You know? So, wanting to do that to the mosquito, that is your emotion reacting. You are angry with the mosquito coming to disturb you in the ear. So that thought is pulling in the other direction. So the thought that you should not harm living beings, and the thought that you want to get rid of this mosquito because it's so disturbing to you and stopping you from sleeping peacefully. So that is pulling in opposite directions. So this is cognitive dissonance. So this arises unconsciously. Our mind is constantly doing that. Another simple example. How many of you love to eat durian? Yeah, so many. Yeah. Can you tell me one good reason why durian is good for you, health-wise, to your body, to your mind? No. But we can answer that question in an emotional way. Durian makes us feel good. We enjoy it. Durian brings all the friends together, but all these are emotional reactions. So, knowing that, in fact, we all know durian is not a healthy fruit. It causes heatiness in the body. It causes a lot of problems in the body. There's high content of sulfur, high content of sugar in some cases. So all that is not good for us, not healthy for us. So knowing durian is not healthy for us, the mind is pulling in one direction, rational. But wanting to enjoy durian, that is pulling the other way. And because of that, now, which one do you think is more likely to win when we see durian? Wanting to enjoy durian. The emotion will always win. If you love durian and you walk by and then there is a cheap sale going on durian, of course you get very attracted. Of course you have a desire to want to buy the durian. Because, you enjoy it. So that emotion is pulling in one direction. But you know durian is not good for your health. But we always succumb to the emotions. So this is really what Vicikiccha really means. Vicikiccha causes us to doubt what we believe in to be true. We know durian is not healthy, but we ignore it, we let it go, we don't care about it. This is why the Buddha says there are many ignorant people in this world. Because we ignore what we know to be true. We ignore what we know to be good for us. That's what makes us ignorant. Right? So Vicikiccha leads to this doubt, and that doubt leads to ignorant behavior. The next is Mananu Sayanam, from the word mana. Mana means conceit or ego, right? The ego. So conceit arises. So the ego arises to protect this notion of the self. So this is conceit arising unconsciously. Bhava Raganu Sayanam. Bhava means existence. Raga is clinging on. So it's basically the clinging on to existence arising unconsciously. Now we're going to examine all these one by one. Right? And the last one of the 7 is Avijja Sayanam. Right? Avijja basically means not knowing, and very often it's translated as the word ignorance. Right? This not knowing arises, and then we begin to behave in such a way without realizing that we are acting against what is wholesome and so on. Right. So these are the 7. So basically, having said that, then the Buddha went on to conclude and said, this is how these 7 unconscious mental processes arise, bringing about conflicts of all kinds. Because of these 7, we begin to create conflict. And that is what the Buddha has said. And Buddha then went on to relate this experience to all his disciples. And having said that, the Buddha then went and retired. The Buddha did not explain in details what these 7 are. Right? So the disciples of the Buddha, having heard Buddha tell the story about meeting this guy, Dandapani, and then talked about these 7, and then the Buddha left. So they were very worried, very puzzled. They didn't quite understand. So they went to seek the advice of an elderly monk, right, who is at that time an Arahant already, Mahakachana. So they went to seek the advice of Mahakachana to please explain to them what did the Buddha mean. So basically, I'll just quickly run through what has happened there. Right? So when things begin to stimulate our senses, the mind interprets and gives meaning to what we have seen, heard, smell, taste, and touch. The emotional mind arises in reaction to pleasant and unpleasant sensations. We begin to decide what to do. making decision what to do is called cetana, volition, right? Intention. So deciding what to do, cetana, leads to action. We do something or we don't do something. That is a kind of action. That is karma. And whatever action we take, it produces an outcome. The outcome produced by our action is called vipaka. And sooner or later, this outcome will come back and affect our life. And this is basically how the cycle of karma works. We see, hear, smell, taste and touch something. We begin to interpret what we have seen, heard, smell, taste and touch. We begin to react to the feeling, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And then we start to make a decision, what is it that we want to do about this? Right? And then we start to do something, and all that will create outcomes in our life. So this is what happens in the cycle of karma. Okay. So this Mahakachana went on to explain to the disciples what happens. So he went on to talk about this thing that arises in the mind and what do we do about it, right? The activity called I, that means when we are seeing something, this activity of seeing, and the image that arises gives rise to the I perception, the experience of seeing. And the presence of these three conditions give rise to what is in Pali called phassa. And phassa is often translated as contact, right? Contact. But actually, in a very scientific way, my teacher has explained that phassa is not contact. Phassa is really forming concepts about what we have seen. And this forming of concept is really called phassa. And when phassa arises, right, there is cognition, there is feeling. So whenever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch something, we form concepts, and then there's a feeling associated with it, and we begin to react to it. So whatever that is felt, wherever there is feeling, there is something that we have sensed. We have realized that there is this sensation. And whenever we sense something, we begin to think about it, infer, right? The word is infer. And whatever we think about it, we begin to recognize it. And that is how the mind works. This is the combined activity of mano and chitta. The mind is made of all these three mental experiences, vijnana, mano and chitta, not just one, right? I want to point out to this word, infer. Infer comes from the word vitaka. Vitaka means thinking or inferring. Whatever happens whenever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, the mind actually first asks a question, and asking a question, the Pali word for that is called vichara. And then the mind tries to answer that question by creating stories behind it. And that creating of stories behind it, or thoughts about what has been seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched, that is vitaka. This is why these two terms always go together. Vitaka, vichara. Right? Vitaka, vichara. And the mind is constantly doing that. Vitaka, vichara. Because every time you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch anything, the mind begins to ask, what is this? Why is this? Where is it coming from? All these are questions that keep arising in the mind. Every time we see, hear, smell, taste and touch something, all these are arising unconsciously. And then in response to the vichara, which is the question, there is vitaka, the thoughts that create these stories. So vitaka here is inference. Vichara is inquiry. Every time we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, the mind inquires, what is this? Why is this? How does it affect me? So that is vichara. And at the same time, the mind creates stories to explain it. That is vitaka. So vitaka, vichara go together. This is why taming the mind, purifying the mind, requires the purification of vichara, vitaka. Right? Okay, let's move on about this experience of seeing. Right? That's what Mahakachana was explaining. What is seeing then? Seeing depends on various necessary conditions. In order to see the dog, we need to have light, because without light we can't see the dog. Right? So light helps us see the dog, because light is reflected from the dog and then entering the eye, stimulating the eyeball, at the retina at the back of the eyeball, and that is your sense organ, stimulating the sense organ. This is why the word rupa does not actually refer to the dog sitting out there. Rupa is talking about the image that is created in the mind when light enters the eyeball. So rupa is referring to the image of a dog out there, not the dog itself, right? Not the actual object, but rather the image of the object. And when light sensitive cells stimulate the sense organ, then we begin to pay attention and begin to form the process of perception, panchakanda. And then we have this mental image arising in the mind, the rupa arising. Now, whenever there is a mental image arises, there is a thought that associated with it, because the mental image arises, then there is a vichara. What is this? And then there is a vitaka. Oh, I see the dog out there. You see, whenever we see something, the thought that arises is, I see something. The I is very strong. The creation of this notion that there is an I that is experiencing it. Automatically, the mind creates this notion. If the mind is not well trained, this is the normal automatic response in the mind. I see the dog out there. And because of that, the mind begins to project, oh, there is a dog out there. And now, this projection of a thought, there is a dog out there that I have just seen, this actually causes a breakdown of the experience, because in that whole process, all that is happening is the process of seeing. And seeing is just an experience. Now, this process of seeing is then broken down into two parts. The mind breaks it into two parts. Untrained minds do that. So if we don't train our mind through the practice of meditation, then we are constantly breaking everything into two parts. What are the two parts? The subjective part and the objective part. The subjective part is thinking that there is a self being affected by this experience, creating the idea of the self. And this idea of the self is called atta. The word atta is commonly translated as self, but actually it's really the notion of a self. And then thinking that there is something out there, that is the notion that there is a world out there, and that is loka, the world. So the mind creates the concept that there is a self that is affected by this experience, and there is a world out there that is doing the affecting, that is affecting us, right? And then the mind begins to put this experience together. So seeing leads to this appearance of the image in the mind called rupa. Then of course all the other senses will also lead to this mental activity going on, this perception in the mind that I have seen something, I have heard something, I have smelled something, I have tasted something, and I have touched something. So that arises in the mind. Now you notice that when you taste something, the word jiva there, referring to the tongue, what is the mental experience that arises? Rasa. Rasa is also the same word in Malay. So they are derived from Sanskrit. Rasa means taste, right? So this is really how it all works. And then Mano puts it all together. Mano actually then puts it all together by categorizing it and then recognizing it. So this recognition is called Dhamma. Creating the knowledge that now I have seen something, I know what it is. So this is what the mind does. Seeing something, having the mental image arising, that is called percept or perception. Percept or perception is what was perceived by the sense organs. And then the mind begins to interpret it and give meaning to it. That is called concept or conception. Conception is what was recognized by categorizing what was perceived and then giving meaning to it, right? So that is really how the mind works. And this is how we remember things. This is how we imagine things. So all this can be easily summarized in this statement here. And this is what Mahakachana was talking about. He says that when something is recognized, it is in this way that the person begins to behave in the past, the present, and the future according to the way that he has categorized and interpreted what was perceived, right? So this is how we react. So now if we were to look at it graphically from the flow chart, experience is a chain reaction. Whenever we see, hear, smell, taste and touch something, there is a sensation associated with it, and that red arrow there is the sensation. And all this leads to emotional reaction, because emotion comes in two different dimensions: physiological and psychological. Physiological is the body feelings, the sensation to be either pleasant or unpleasant. Psychological is the mind reacting to that feeling. So there is an arousal, right? That is realizing the feeling is either pleasant or unpleasant. Then there is a reaction, reacting to the pleasant or unpleasant feeling. And when that happens in the mind, right, this psychological process arises, and this psychological process leads to emotional excitement and mental proliferation. Emotional excitement means if it is something pleasant, we want more of it. If it is something unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. So this is an emotional excitement. And then the mind begins to proliferate, begins to create ideas. What should I do now? Should I do something now? Should I get rid of it? Should I run away? And this and that. So the mind begins to run around creating all kinds of thoughts. And when that emotional disturbance arises, it actually disturbs the thinking mind. So the chitta responsible for creating this emotional excitement starts to disturb the thinking mind, the mano. And this is where chitta disturbs mano. This disturbance is actually causing distress. That means mental suffering. See, the bodily feeling is physical suffering, stress, dukkha. The mental experience is distress or domanassa, mental suffering. And all that will lead to the mind being torn in two different directions. And that is why we have the word vichikicha, cognitive dissonance. It is a tug of war going on, right, in the mind. This tug of war pulling in opposite directions. And when that happens, the mind begins to ask another question. Another vichara arises. How does this affect me? And then the mind begins to go into all kinds of thoughts and views, how whatever we have seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched is going to affect our life, right? So this is really causing us to then seek rationalization, right? And there are 8 different worldly conditions we are seeking. We want more of gain, less of loss. We want more of fame, less of ill fame. We want more of praise, less of blame. And we want more of pleasure and less of pain. That's really what is happening, and this is explained in the sutra in Anguttara Nikaya 8.6, right? The 8 conditions, the 8 worldly conditions. So coming back to what the Buddha explained about those 7 different ways of unconscious processes arising, let's examine each one by one. So the first one, right, is Raganu Sayanam. Raganu Sayanam is referring to our reaction to sensual pleasures. Something we have experienced which is now pleasurable, right? Seeing durian, right? Wanting to eat durian. That is Raganu Sayanam. So the desires and greed arising unconsciously. And we begin to identify what is pleasing. Oh, durian is a very pleasing thing, right? Who doesn't love the sight of durian? Better still, the taste of durian, you know? So identifying what is pleasing, comfortable, and familiar. Right? The opposite of that is when that experience is unpleasant, uncomfortable, and that is called Patiganu Sayanam, right? Related to the word patiga, right? And that is basically a reaction to something that is unpleasant. So we begin to become angry with it if it continues to affect us, unpleasant things. See, first, when unpleasant experience arises, we want to get rid of it. Wanting to get rid of it is called aversion, avoiding it. But we can't always avoid bad experiences. And some of these bad experiences, we can't get rid of them. They keep coming to us. So when they keep coming to us, this wanting to avoid turns into anger. And if we still cannot avoid it and fight against it, the anger turns into hatred. I'll give you a very simple example, and this is a real life example. My experience. I have a neighbor. She lives opposite me. She likes to throw garbage in front of my house because the city council, Bandaraya, gives us a nice little green bin where we can put our rubbish. She doesn't want to use hers. She keeps it in the backyard. She only throws rubbish into our bin. Sometimes she doesn't even throw it inside the bin. She throws it outside the bin. That really makes me angry, and she does that all the time. Right? So I thought, okay, I can't stop her. I even talked to her nicely. Can't stop her. So let's say, hypothetically, one day I decided, okay, I'll sell this house and move to another area. So I found this new area. I think one of the new areas around Klang area is Eco Park, Satya area. So I buy this nice little house in that area. And it's a new area. Nobody else has moved in yet. A few people have moved in, and I moved into the house. It's a beautiful, nice little place. I enjoy it. And then, of course, there's a vacant lot next door. And then suddenly somebody has bought it up and then moves in. And guess who moved in? My neighbor. Oh, that really makes me angry, and I hate it, See, you can't get rid of some things in life. Then you begin to hate it, right? So, that is Patiganu Sayanam, right? And identifying what is displeasing. Recognizing, oh, this I hate. Right? Making a point that I hate this uncomfortable thing, right? The third one is forming of views, Ditanu Sayanam. Basically, we have opinions and beliefs arising unconsciously. We have certain beliefs, and these beliefs arise because of memory, imagination, from our upbringing. So let's say it's because of our upbringing. Actually, beliefs are formed from past encounters, past experiences, and the strongest beliefs are the beliefs imparted upon us by our parents. Very often, majority of people embrace the same religion or a similar religion as what their parents do, because they are brought up to believe in a certain things. So for those of you who are brought up in a culture or in a religion that believes in creation, believes in existence of this God in heaven, then we grow up believing in that God because of the upbringing, right? So this is called Ditanu Sayana, and it leads to emotional attachments, clinging to views, right? And this emotional, and it actually guides us to make decisions in an emotional way according to what we believe, according to how we were brought up. So emotional navigation aid to decision making. So let's take a look at what psychologists have to say about this emotional navigation aid, right, to in our decision making.
All the things that you go through in your life in terms of decisions are inevitably accompanied by some kind of emotion, positive or negative. Each decision has some kind of similarity with a decision of the past. And when you are in a position to decide once again, you will call up an emotional memory that will appear as a gut feeling and will lead you in one direction or another. So what you have is literally a navigational aid, something that helps you get to the right decision. And if that is broken down, then you're at the mercy of facts and logic, and that's just not good enough.
See, it's not just having views. We cling on to the views. So there is an emotional gut feeling associated with it. We cling on to views. Now, some of you may have come across this famous philosopher by the name of René Descartes. And his most famous saying is the word cogito ergo sum. It basically, in English, it is, I think, therefore I am. That was his way of explaining what he understands to be our existence. Right? I am is a very existential term. So he described that the mind and the body are two separate things. But actually he was wrong. The mind and the body are, even though you can classify it separately, but the mind and the body are intertwined. What you think affects what happens in your body, how you feel. How you feel in the body, whether you're sick or not sick, affects how you think. True or not? If you're sick in the body, doesn't that affect your mood for the day and affect your decision making? At the same time, if you think of something you really want to do, doesn't that guide your body to go towards it? That your body now reacts according to what your mind has decided. So the two are intertwined. The mind and the body are inseparable in many ways. But very often, all decisions and reactions are guided by how we feel, not what we think. It is how we feel that causes us to react. Therefore, if you look at what he has stated, I would like to correct him. It is not I think, therefore I am. It is I feel, therefore I am. It is the way we feel that makes us become who we are. So, very importantly, and in ancient times, there was an old Sanskrit shloka. Shloka is a poem, is a simple philosophical poem that teaches people certain things. So there is an ancient poem in India, Sanskrit poem, even long before the Buddha's time. It basically means taking food, sleeping, avoiding dangers, sexual activities. These are common between animals and humans. But what makes us different, right? Ability to think is what makes humans different. Without thinking, humans are just like animals. That means if we behave according to our emotions, we are behaving like an animal. Yeah? We often call people who behave in that manner animals, right? Rapists, robbers, right? Thugs, gangsters. We label them as animals because they behave in such a way. So we have to be very cautious that there is a part of us that feels something, there is a part of us that can think. Rely on your thinking to make decisions, not just going by how you feel about something. So this is a very ancient teaching that has passed on through the generations. And then if we allow the thinking and feeling to pull in opposite direction, that is vicikicca. So then the number 4, Mahakachana explained, number 4 is basically vicikicchanu sayanam. This is really the mind being pulled in opposite direction. And when the mind is pulled in opposite direction, we begin to doubt what we know. We begin to doubt, maybe durian is okay lah. Even though we know durian is not healthy for us, we would think, it's okay lah, durian, never mind lah, can eat lah. You know, we doubt that. And that is skeptical doubt. This is our emotional tendency. And this emotional tendency will try to overcome what we know, overcoming knowledge and intellect. Because of this tug of war going on. Now, when your mind is pulled in opposite direction, knowing what is good for you and then feeling, wanting to do, wishing to do something different, usually which one wins? The thinking or the feeling? Which one wins? Feeling, most of the time. But don't be too hard on yourself. The scientists have a very simple way of explaining this. Take a look at this next one. Why, when the mind is pulled in opposite direction, tug of war going on in the mind, that it is really our feeling that wins? Because the mind, there are two parts of the mind is the activity of the brain. There are two parts of the brain. One part of the brain responsible for our anger, our emotion, and that is a little part of the brain called the amygdala. Another part of the brain, the thinking brain, is responsible for our decisions and knowing what is right from wrong. And this part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. So there are two parts of the brain, amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Amygdala is responsible for all our suffering. It causes us to suffer in many ways. Prefrontal cortex is the thinking brain that can help relieve us from suffering. So when you practice meditation, cultivating the mind, what are you doing? You are taming the amygdala. And then at the same time sharpening the prefrontal cortex so that you are able to think more clearly. And this sharpening is really the training of meditation. For you first to start with focusing on your breath and then went on to then focus on how thoughts arise. This is a training of the mind in order to sharpen your thinking mind. which is the activity of the prefrontal cortex. So these two are pulling in opposite direction. Amygdala, which is responsible for your emotional reactions and anger and hatred, and prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your conscious rational thinking. So what happens? Right? See what the scientists have to say about it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tug!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is, if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions, this is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
The thinking brain and the emotional brain. There are very strong connections from the emotional brain, the amygdala, leading to the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain. And these strong connections, whenever the amygdala is aroused, they cause a lot of messages being sent to the thinking brain, disturbing the thinking brain. While at the same time, the connections from the thinking brain leading back to the emotional brain, the amygdala, are very weak. So the thinking brain has no way of trying to calm down the emotional brain because the connections are very weak. So the emotional brain, when it is aroused, it is sabotaging the thinking brain by sending a lot of messages to the thinking brain, and then the thinking brain trying to subdue these emotions, just not strong enough to bring down the activity of the amygdala. So the amygdala will always win in a fight between amygdala and prefrontal cortex. This is why when we have to make decisions, our emotions are more likely to take control because of this battle between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, right? And then we begin to have this notion of an ego. We begin to have this ego, conceit, they call it. So, mananu sayanang, conceit arising unconsciously. And this is really ego. And ego leads to a kind of expectation. I expect something. Whenever we see something not according to what we want, we have expectations. All that is because of the ego. And we cling on to this notion of that ego self, right? And clinging on is the process of upadana, which is personalization. My teacher translates upadana as personalization. The word upadana is commonly translated as clinging or grasping or attachment. But my teacher says a more accurate word is personalization. Every time we experience something, we personalize and say, oh, this is my experience, this is my idea, this is my thought. We even get to the point of personalizing property, right? Personalizing objects. This is my car, don't touch my car, We do that. This is my phone, don't ever open my phone, that kind of thing. The I, me, and mine are very strong. And then number 6 is Bhavaraganu Sayana, from two core root words. Bhava means existence, Raga means clinging on to the pleasures of existence. So clinging to existence, seeking stability. Why do we cling to existence? Because we want something to be stable. We want things to remain unchanged. We seek permanence. We don't like things that are always changing. We want to be sure things remain unchanged. We don't like to see more and more white hair cropping up. We don't want to lose our hair. We want to hang on to whatever hair we have. But of course, over the years, more and more will drop off. Right? It's no return, you know. So clinging to this existence, seeking permanence, seeking stability, clinging to the body, thinking that this body is me. This is another kind of clinging. Because the only thing that can represent existence of me is the body. And so we cling on to it. But is the body me? So let's take a look what scientists have to say about this, how this notion that the body is me comes about. And this is actually by this very famous brain scientist, Antonio Damasio. He explained how the self, the notion of a self, arises because of the body.
What is consciousness? What is a conscious mind? Well, first of all, it is a mind which is a flow of mental images. And of course, consider images that can be sensory patterns, visual, such as you're having right now in relation to the stage and me, or auditory images as you're having now in relation to my words. That flow of mental images is mind. But there is something else that we're all experiencing in this room. We are not passive exhibitors of visual or auditory or tactile images. We have selves. We have a me that is automatically present in our minds right now. We own our minds, and we have a sense that it's every one of us that is experiencing this, not the person who is sitting next to you. So in order to have a conscious mind, you have a self within the conscious mind. So a conscious mind is a mind with a self in it. The self introduces a subjective perspective in the mind, and we are only fully conscious when self comes to mind. So what we need to know to even address this mystery is, number one, how minds are put together in the brain, and number two, how selves are constructed. But what about the self? The self is really the elusive problem. And for a long time, people did not even want to touch it, and because they say, how can you have this sort of reference point, this stability that is required to maintain the continuity of selves day after day? And I thought about a solution to this problem is the following. We generate brain maps of the body's interior and use them as the reference for all other maps. So let me tell you just a little bit about how I came to this. I came to this because if you're going to have a reference that we know as self, the me, the I in our own processing, we need to have something that is stable, something that does not deviate much from day to day. Well, it so happens that we have a singular body. We have one body, not two, not three, and so that is a beginning. There is just one reference point, which is the body.
So we're always trying to look for continuity and stability, right? Something familiar, and therefore the body is the only thing that can represent the notion of a self as existing. So we cling on to that, right? So let's take a look at what he said specifically. He says, the mind is a continuous flow of mental images, which is this vijnana that is going on. The Panchakanda producing the vijnana, continuously having nama-rupa, nama-rupa, nama-rupa appearing, right? And a conscious mind is a mind with a self in it. That means we begin to think that we exist. We begin to recognize that there is existence in the mind because we created this notion of a self. So a conscious mind, by being conscious of a self in the world, that is where the mind has created the notion of a self. And the self introduces a subjective perspective to the mind. And we are only conscious when self comes to mind. That means we become aware of our so-called existence when this notion of the self arises in the mind. And because of that, we need to understand two important things. First is how the mind is put together, how the mind works. And we have already discussed that briefly, right? This process of the mind arising with perception, cognition, and then emotions, right? The vijnana, mano, and chitta. Now, how selves are constructed. How is it constructed? Basically, in the brain, there is a region of the brain where it begins to recognize different parts of the body. And that region of the brain recognizing different parts of the body helps us navigate in our environment. The brain knows where every part of the body is, because when you close your eyes, you can touch your ear. You don't need to see where your ear is. You know where your ear is. Have you ever seen your own ear directly without looking at a mirror? Of course you haven't, but you know where it is. You can touch it because there is a part in the brain that recognizes the position of the ear, because every part of our body, the brain has a brain map. And we use this map to navigate in our environment. Whatever we do, every action we make, it is helping us to navigate. And because it is helping us to navigate in this manner, we begin to feel this body is me. Right? And that is this feeling that reinforces that the body is me. The body and the experience of the body becomes reference point for the self. And this is how we begin to personalize. This is me, I, me, and mine. So if we look at this process of personalization, and this is actually explained by my teacher, Venerable Dr. Banerjee, he was saying this is the process of personalization called Sakkaya Ditthi. Sakkaya Ditthi comes from three root words. Sak. Sak means to take ownership, to want to take ownership, to own something. Kaya. Kaya means the body. Ditthi. Ditthi means point of view or perspective. That means we think this we want to own this body. I own this body. But do you really own your body? Right? When you die, do you have control over your body when you die? Does the body go with you when you die? Your body is remaining in this world when you die. Right? So basically, we always have this notion of wanting to own the body, and that is Sakkaya Ditthi. So how does that happen? First, there is this emotional concept, this notion that there is a self, because every time we feel something, we begin to react to it. So we think there is a self being affected by this feeling. At the same time, we personalize these feelings as the experience of the body. But actually, is the experience happening in the body or not? Think about it. When you are suffering, when you feel something that is painful, now you are suffering, you are angry. Where is the anger? Is it in the body or is it in the mind? It's all in the mind. But we think it's in the body. My body is affected. Now I'm sick, and then I'm suffering. But the condition of the body is just the condition of the body. Suffering is in the mind. So that's why some people say suffering, pain is real. We touch something, we hit something, it's painful. But suffering is optional. We begin to say that, oh, I'm hurt. Same thing when somebody says something to you. When somebody says something nasty to you, the word spoken is real. He said those words. But when you get hurt, when you get angry, it's got nothing to do with the words being spoken. It's got to do with the way you interpret what was spoken to you. Somebody says to me, Billy, you're very fat. Then I start to think, oh, he's trying to hurt my feelings. But then I could also think, he's my good friend. He's actually advising me to watch my weight. He's concerned for my good health. So there are different ways to interpret what somebody says to you. So ladies, the next time somebody says to you, your dress doesn't look nice on you, don't get angry, huh? Maybe that person is advising you, try and find another dress with a different color or different design that is more suited to your age. You might be dressing far younger than your real age or whatever. It could be anything like that, right? So it's the way we interpret. So we begin to interpret the experience of the body as me. And because of that, we then create the notions that, oh, this body is me. Now, this process can be demonstrated that we unconsciously personalize a lot of things going on around us. This is why now today, in modern world, we begin to personalize my phone, my car, right? Even objects we begin to personalize is me. So now this is an experiment called the fake hand experiment, where the psychologist testing it is actually using a fake arm for a person, putting a fake hand, and then that person goes through an experience and begin to think that even that hand is him. So let's take a look at this fake hand experiment.
Jonah's recreating a classic psychology experiment.
The rubber hand illusion is a funny hack of the brain where you can convince people very quickly that this rubber arm is actually their own arm.
He's setting up a stand at Venice Beach. where he'll test volunteers to see if they can experience sensations in a hand that's not theirs.
Welcome to the rubber hand experience. I want you to put your left hand right here and put your right hand right here.
Jonah has participants hide their right hand out of sight behind a divider,
I'm just going to drape this so as if it's your real hand.
while he places a rubber hand on the table in front of them.
Just stare at this hand.
Jonah primes participants by brushing both the fake and real hand simultaneously, a process which helps the brain link the feeling to the fake arm.
I feel like you're doing that to my hand, but that's not my hand. My hand's over there. So that's kind of weird.
That's kind of weird.
Now that Jonah has linked this volunteer's brain to the new hand, he's got an even bigger surprise for her.
I was a little bit scared.
Good plunge.
Oh my goodness. When you hit that thing, I thought I was gonna lose my hand. So I was so scary. And it really felt like that was like I could move those fingers if I wanted to. My brain decided that I could feel that.
Yeah.
And that you hitting that was hitting me. That's so strange how it does that.
Impressive, right? Let's see how many other people fall prey to this mind game.
My name's Jonah. Okay, so you keep on staring at that hand.
That was crazy. That was crazy.
Okay.
Oh wow, that scared me.
That scared you?
Although around 10% of the participants weren't able to mentally connect the fake hand to their body,
Did it feel like I smashed your hand at all? No.
Nope.
most felt some kind of phantom sensation, if not actual pain. Jonah is hacking into these people's mental body maps,
Oh my God.
causing them to connect information inaccurately.
Right.
So you can see even a fake hand, people can personalize and, oh, I think this is my hand because of the whole experiment itself. It proves that that's why we think the body is me, I, me and mine, right? So the last one is avijjanu sayanam. Basically, avijja means not knowing. And of course, some people translate that as ignorant. It is not realizing, not knowing, no knowledge, or because of no knowledge, we become fearful, right? And because we are fearful, we have fear, we have anxiety, and we have confusion, and that leads to the triggering, arising of imagination, memory, expectations. And that is causing us to make decisions in unwholesome ways. So that's why some people say this is ignorance. But actually it's not simply ignorance, but really the arising of imagination, memory, expectation. Imagination, I. Memory, M. Expectation, E. That's why I call this the I-M-E syndrome. The I-me syndrome. Because when that arises, everything is centered around me. I, me, and mine. So the I-me syndrome. So these are the 7. So in a nutshell, these are the 7 things that cause us to think in ways that leads to debates and conflict. And this is the nature of our human behavior. Human beings are never happy. Why? Because human beings are the only species of animal that regrets the past, is fearful of the future, and never satisfied with the present moment. This is something that is always going on, right? We are always like that. So the Buddha, in his very first sermon, one of the very first things, you see, a lot of people thought, oh, the first thing that the Buddha taught are the 4 Noble Truths. Actually, if you look at the actual sermon, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, the very first sermon, setting into motion the wheel of Dhamma, the first thing the Buddha taught is actually the middle way. Because the Buddha pointed out that first, we experience sensual pleasures because he knows that. When he was Prince Siddhartha, he was constantly experiencing sensual pleasures. So he knew what he was talking about. That as Prince Siddhartha, he was constantly experiencing these sensual pleasures. He was indulging in the sensual pleasures as Prince Siddhartha, enjoying wonderful life of dancing girls and good food and everything around him. So he knew that there are 2 extremes to be avoided. The first one is this indulgence in sensual pleasures. And then of course when Prince Siddhartha renounced and started practicing asceticism, he also knew there was the other extreme. So he pointed out there is this other extreme of self-torment and self-mortification, asceticism actually, that should be avoided. So these are two extremes. See, when we experience sensual pleasures, there are two ways that most people behave. Either they actually indulge in it, or they force themselves, no, I don't want it. I want to stop eating this, right? And forcing themselves, and this is putting a lot of pressure. So the Buddha taught that these are the two extremes to be avoided. So when sensual pleasures arise, that reaction is a very emotional reaction. Well, both are emotional reaction, but here we are either wanting more of it or we want to get rid of something unpleasant. And then at the same time, when we are trying to suppress our emotion, right, we are actually bringing a lot of suffering to us. So the Buddha pointed out to avoid these two. There is a middle way. Now a lot of people misunderstand the middle way. They think the middle way is a little bit of sensual pleasures and a little bit of suppression. That is the middle way. That is not called the middle way. That is justification. You know, some people say, I enjoy certain pleasures, but at the same time I do a lot of dana, a lot of charity, a lot of good things. I must be okay, I'm practicing the middle path. No, you're not practicing the middle path. You are just justifying what you practice. What is the middle path? The middle path is really when your sense organs are aroused and you get emotionally excited, learn to relax. Conscious relaxation. Learn to relax. And then with this conscious relaxation, bring your attention inwards. Bringing your attention inwards is called introspective attention. Introspective attention is what Satipatthana is all about. Bringing your attention inwards, sati. Right? Bring your attention inwards and observe how the body reacts and how the body feels and how emotions arise and how you interpret your circumstances. Those are the four foundations of mindfulness. And finally, when you're able to do that, you can bring the mind to a level of stillness and peace called mental equilibrium. And this is all explained through the Eightfold Way, how we can practice the Eightfold Way. So this was actually the first thing the Buddha taught before he went on to explain the Four Noble Truths. Right? And in order to practice this, I'll give you one very simple way of doing this. It is called the 3-step self-compassion. Whenever you realize something is happening, making you emotionally excited, what should you do? The first thing you should do is pause. Do not react. Because at that moment, if you begin to react, you are reacting emotionally. Every decision you make at that moment when you get emotionally excited, it is an emotional reaction. So learn to pause. Every time something makes you angry, something makes you fearful, something makes you anxious, something makes you feel hatred, do not react. Then learn to relax. Take a deep breath. Learn to relax. What happens when you pause and you relax? You see, when you get excited, there's a lot of unhealthy hormones flooding your body. So when you pause, you're basically stopping further release of these unhealthy hormones. You're allowing time for your emotional excitement to calm down. You're allowing time for your anxiety to calm down. And also allowing time for all your hormonal reactions to subside. And then when you relax, one of the ways to relax is breathing. When you relax, right, taking deep breaths relaxes the body, calms the mind, because this will help to speed up the subsiding of all these hormones that are being released. So take a deep breath and allow all this to subside. And when you are adequately calm, then you think. You're able to think and respond to the circumstances. Think rationally. Because by that time, when you are relaxed, you're no longer thinking emotionally. You are now thinking more rationally, able to purposefully focus on the problem and a wholesome solution or beneficial solution to the problem. So that is really the way to go, the middle way. Learn to pause, relax, and think. Simple. That's how simple it is, the middle way. Every time you get emotionally excited, when somebody calls you, oh, you're getting too fat. Or somebody says, your dress looks so ugly on you. You know, don't react. Just pause, relax, and then respond. One of the response, when somebody says something that appears to hurt you, one of the response is to ask that person to clarify. Oh, why are you saying that I'm getting fat? And then you might hear that person say, oh, because I'm very concerned for your good health. That's a wonderful thing. You're such a wonderful friend. So anybody who calls me fat, I call him, he's my wonderful friend. Keep calling me fat. Bring it on. You know, that's how it is. So I hope today's sharing has been helpful. That there are these 7 ways that make us create stories in our mind, that makes us want to argue with people, and then we begin to end up in some kind of conflict, right? So thank you very much for your attention. So I hope this has been helpful to you.